Hi, Lana. I'm so happy you're here.
Oh my gosh, Lisa, we've been talking about this for since we met in October. So I'm glad
I
we made it
know.
happen. So
I
yay.
know. I have to say, one of the highlights of ASRM here in Denver was getting to meet you. We had so much fun. And when I met you and learned of your mission, I was like, this is so needed. And I just right away was like wanting to connect. And we got to hang out and have so much fun that whole weekend. But I'm so honored you're here. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, well, we might want to talk about this later, but you were there for like a pretty monumental part of my journey. That night we ran into my RE. So we can maybe
I
touch on that
I
later.
I have your Christmas card right here. And what you wrote to me, gosh, you were there for one of the biggest moments in my life. And it meant so much to share that with you. Yes, we will talk about that because I can't imagine all the feels that went through your mind in that moment and getting to be there to witness that had been long coming for years.
I'm
And
tearing up
so
already
I
thinking of.
know, I know, I know we're going to get through this. But like what you're about, you've created such a sacred space for women who move forward after fertility treatments without a child. You've created a community of belonging, of purpose, of meaning. And like, I'm just here to highlight you and elevate you and just share more of these kind of resources because they're not talked about enough. And I'm crying because this
Yeah.
is like so special, the work you're doing. And I just want you to kind of introduce yourself a little bit. And you're in Chicago. You've had a long fertility journey, which led to the work that you're doing now.
Yeah. Well, thank you for giving me this platform
Yeah.
because I know if for the listeners that are still going through fertility treatments, it might really be hard to envision yourself ending up without a child. And one of the things I would love to highlight is that I never would talk anyone out of continuing fertility treatments or doing them or going through them, because if I had to do it all over, I would do it again. Like the
Yeah.
leaving fertility treatments knowing that I tried everything that I could is really something that I will never regret. And I really think it's important that if you are on this journey, just giving yourself that opportunity to recognize that you are really giving it your all. And if you end up like
Mhm.
me without a child, it's not because you did something wrong. So,
Mhm.
before I got into my intro, I just wanted to clarify that. And if you're not ready to listen to this episode, I want to acknowledge that too, because it might be hard to think of yourself as someone like me and
Mm.
maybe come back to it later if you feel called. So I want to give you that permission to turn the sound off right now, or maybe flip to a different
Yeah.
episode if you're not ready for this.
Oh, so good.
Yeah. So a little about me. Well, I was always a goal achieving person, social butterfly, out there doing all
Yeah.
the things. And I really didn't think about marriage until I was in my 30s. I
Mhm. Same.
was
Yeah.
doing the things and
Yeah.
enjoying life. And I happened to stumble upon my husband when I was 32. And then we ended up getting married. I was 35. And to be honest, I never thought that I would have trouble getting pregnant. I always had regular cycles
Yeah.
and never any indication of anything other than, okay, I'll get off the pill and all of a sudden
Yeah.
I'll get pregnant. Right. So that all changed when I was 37. A girlfriend of mine had gone through fertility treatments. And really, if she hadn't brought it up to me, Lisa, I don't know if I would have even thought about talking to somebody about it. I was,
Mhm.
really, I mean, I was regular going to the OBGYN for my annual exams, but I just kind of felt like it was always going to happen. And
Yeah.
so I remember I was on the phone with her. I call her, I talk about her. I call her my friend in the cracker aisle because I was in the cracker aisle. Never forget, at the grocery store. And she asked me, she's like, have you thought about going to get a workup for
Mm.
to see, what might be going on? And I was like, I guess I should, like it was just like this light bulb went off. So she was really the first person who put it in my brain to even seek any sort of
Mhm.
diagnosis or treatment.
And
And in
sometimes it takes
hindsight,
someone else. It takes an outside person
yeah,
sometimes to like help us see that. Like, okay, maybe let's seek out some help. Let's see what's going on. I
yeah.
too was
And
in the same boat. Yeah.
and it's like, I guess in hindsight, like, did my OBGYNs talk about it? Did someone ask me? Did someone talk about
Yeah.
egg preservation? Like, I don't know. Like, did they, or was I just kind of like, oh, I sort of shoved it off to the side because I just didn't think it would be a problem.
Right.
But whatever the case was, it was like that light bulb moment when I was like, oh my gosh, I might need help.
Mhm.
And that's when I made a appointment with a reproductive endocrinologist. You mentioned I live in Chicago, so I was very fortunate. I had access to really good care and a variety of clinics in our area.
Yeah.
And it was then deemed that uh, I had a diagnosis of unexplained infertility.
Mm.
And that diagnosis on its own was very daunting to me as somebody who thought, I could always figure things out and my life had a path and I knew how to go after goals. So that
Right.
was really where my journey started. At 37, I got that diagnosis of unexplained infertility, which then I did multiple IUIs thinking, oh, this will be my golden ticket. It'll
Mhm.
work. I'll do all the
Mhm.
stuff. I did all the positive everything you can think about. And then when that didn't work, I moved on to IVF. So I sought treatment not only in Chicago where I live, but then ended up, leaving the Chicagoland area and I went to Colorado and did some treatments remote for a total of like a 7-year span of treatments, not, always year after year, but there was some breaks
Mhm.
in there. And I left treatment without a child and I was given zero resources or, hey, how are you? The last conversation was, we can offer you treatment for, I'm sorry, we
Yeah.
can offer you adoption services, or if
Um,
you're interested in an egg donor, we have some people that we can put you in touch with for that. Think
mm,
about it, let us know, and that's a big conversation. So it wasn't like I was ready to make that decision. So I thought about it and I sat with that information and, my husband and I contemplated it. But when
mm.
we decided that neither was right for us, there was no reason to call the clinic back and we never heard from them. And that's, sort of where my treatment journey went south, where I was just like, how
Mm.
am I going to get through this life that I never expected?
7 years. And how many rounds of IVF did you do?
I did 4
Okay.
rounds of IVF throughout the 7 and then 7 IUIs. I was
7
really like,
months.
this is going to work. Like, let's keep the
Okay.
IUI. And, my husband had a little, he had a little wanted to have some sort of natural, if you will, I say that in air quotes,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
connection of, the pregnancy process if it worked for us. And we went into treatment communicating with each other that we were going to be on the same page with things if we're going to
Mhm.
go into this treatment path. So
Okay.
I was very respectful of things that he wanted, he knew things that were kind of my parameters on what was important to me, but we went into it as a couple being very communicative that neither of us would force one another into something that wasn't kind of on our temperature gauge of being okay.
Mhm. So when you came to that realization, that you and your husband wanted to stop treatment after 7 years,
Yeah.
was it you that kind of initiated that with your husband? Like, I'm feeling this way. And how did that go?
Well, it was more dictated by our reproductive endocrinologist. We
Ah.
had at that time they were offering they called it a family building plan. So it was like a 3-pack.
Mm.
So we had gotten the 3-pack and I had a couple canceled cycles within that after buying that 3-pack. So I really only used 2 of them up where I had an actual retrieval at that particular clinic.
Okay.
When it came time for us to think about the third, that's when he said, your response rates have been really low. I feel like we've really tried. I was in my 40s at that point. So the data was obviously pointing towards the reality that I probably wasn't going to have a viable pregnancy. During my retrievals, I had very low rates of
Mhm.
survival rates on my embryos, and
Mm.
my one frozen embryo that I did have, we had thought it had trisomy 16. So there was just a lot of data points that the doctor was like, you can go ahead and do the third one if you'd like, but I just wouldn't advise it. And I love that he did tell me that because I think that there are some people out there that might not be that cut and dry maybe with you, but I was
Right.
at a point where after 7 years, I needed to hear that. And that was really my decision. So my husband and I left that conversation with him just being like, okay, like we're going to stop trying. And then that's when the egg donor and adoption conversation sort of crossed our minds, and we looked into international adoption for a while. And then it really came down to just feeling like I didn't know if I could go through more heartache, and
Mm-hmm.
it not being a thing that I had a guaranteed result at the end. So that's when we ended up saying no to adoption.
Yeah. You honored what was right for you. And I
Yeah.
think for everyone, it's such an individual process and a path that you, if you're going about it yourself or with your partner, like you come to a decision together. And so recognizing we're going to end treatment. And then I know it wasn't until 2 years later, I've heard you talk about that's when you started to really kind of shift. And I don't know if you turn the narrative around or kind of just like taking more control of your life. Can you share a little bit about that journey from deciding to stop treatment and then like where you went from there?
Yeah. Well, I felt like for me, it was luckily at that point in my life, I had a career that was very involved. And for me, I just put my head in the sand and just like careered it out. I
Mhm.
was worked all the time. I prided myself in answering emails at 11 p.m. and being the person that was just on all the time.
Mhm.
But I needed that feeling of purpose, I think, when I
Mhm.
left. And then in 2020, the pandemic happened.
Mhm.
And in the industry that I worked in, we were totally halted. And so we were all working from home. And the thing, I worked in an operating room. So, unless you were having a necessary surgery or emergent surgery, like all elective surgeries were not happening. So I had all this time, and I realized like without my job, I didn't really know who I was anymore.
Mhm.
And it was really the light bulb that went off for me. So as hard as the pandemic was for so many people, and my heart breaks for the people that lost so much during that time, like for me, that was when my life started to take a new route for myself, to realize like, okay, if I don't have this job, do I like who I am? And I'd look in the mirror and I just didn't know who I was anymore. I felt like I had lost who I was. I was in this
Mhm.
like holding pattern still, I think, from fertility treatments, where I was afraid to move ahead, because if I moved ahead, it meant that I was admitting that I wasn't going to be a mom. And even though I knew it on paper and, all the stuff the
Mhm.
doctors had shared, I was like, but wait, I'm not really ready to let go of that part of my life. So it was during the pandemic that I had gained weight throughout my fertility journey, and wasn't really happy physically with, my clothes not fitting, and just not motivated to work out or do anything to really help myself. And I found a woman who was a weight loss coach, and turns out she was a life coach. I never knew anything about life coaching, which is kind of crazy now
Mhm.
to think about, because it's so
Yeah.
impactful. And I started working with her, and she was really the first person to give me any notion that I could create a life that looked different than the one I thought I was going to have, and
Mhm.
still feel proud of who I was as a woman, and feel as though I had meaning and purpose. So that was in 2020. And then I realized that there was no resources given to me, and I couldn't imagine that there were many for others, because, being in a big city, and, the clinic I went to in Colorado, like these are big name places.
Yeah.
And if they weren't offering me resources, I was like, I need to figure out how to be a resource if there's none there. So that's when I enrolled in life coaching school. It was a 1-year program. And then I started a podcast myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that was in 2021. And here I am.
Oh my gosh, well, your podcast. So now what? It's the perfect title because literally
Mhm.
you're like, you finished with treatment. It just breaks my heart that more resources are not given to individuals who have given their all through this. And it's like, okay, we've done all we can. Wipe your hands goodbye. Like it's, I- do you see change in this area or because you're in this work, like are more services offerings being given to clients?
Well, I want to say I hope so. I can't
Yeah.
say yes for sure.
The people
I
that
did,
find you probably they give you input, I'm sure too,
yeah.
that like nothing was given to them.
Yeah, most people that find me on their own research. I have yet to have someone say, "Oh, my provider told me about you." And that was the big reason why I wanted to go to ASRM and let people know, because I want to give doctors the benefit of the doubt. Like,
Yeah.
I get it. Like, they're inundated. And
Mhm.
when you're a billable patient, like, that keeps the lights on and the doors open, and the flow
Right.
of their practice is built on that. And so I respect that. But I think about, what if you have like a terminal cancer patient and
Hmm.
chemo doesn't work, or radiation doesn't work, and that there's nothing else to offer? Like, people still offer those patients like a resource group, or a prostate cancer survivor group, breast cancer survivor, like whatever it is. And so I just have to keep moving forward, thinking that they just don't know something like me exists.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I try to come at it instead of from an angry place, where I
Yeah.
sat for so long feeling angry and thrown aside. And I really am trying, as the
Mm.
leader that I'm trying to be in this space, or the leader that I am, I'll declare that.
You're the leader. You are stepping into this space. Like, I don't know anyone else like you doing this work. And that's why I tell people all the time about what you're doing. And, let's talk about that. Cause what you're doing is you're helping women rediscover, I like going deep within, like finding their purpose, like deepening in their joy. And you say, so they can build a future they truly love.
Yeah. I just didn't think that was possible without kids, Is like,
Yeah.
the women that I knew who didn't have kids either were like powerhouse career people, which is great. And so that's why I think I went in that direction, because I was like, well, that's what you do when you don't have kids. Or they were kind of like the sad person that you're like, oh, we got to make sure we invite Mabel over for Christmas because she has nowhere to go,
Mm.
And I saw the two versions of childless women as that. And I was like, but God, it's got to be more than that. And
Mm.
that's why I'm so motivated to help women see that you can really create a life that you love, even if it turned out so different than you thought. Because
Yeah.
we don't see examples of that very often as childless women.
No. And just, it's so cool that you and I are both in a space where we created what we wish existed, what we saw lacking. No.
Yeah, I know. I
And
love that about
changing
you
the
and your
narrative.
story too.
You like, and changing the narrative. That's a big part, I know, of what you're about. It is changing the narrative about moving forward and with quote success, right? What is that? And like these definitions that are given, you and I have talked about this. I hate the term failed fertility patient. Oh, like, no, there's other words, unsuccessful through fertility treatments. We're still a person first, right? We're not a failed client.
Yeah, totally. Or unresponsive, or,
What have
like
you heard?
something. Well, I mostly hear, failed fertility patient. And what I try to say is IVF failed for me, that
Mhm.
even though that's still that word that you sometimes can't escape, because clinical acumen is what it
Mm.
is. It's been that way. As much as when I was in life coach school, I remember I was like, I am going to get the medical industry to stop using this word. And I was like, so determined.
Mm.
And then two things came up. It was like, okay, well, I can decide what I want to make that word mean about me, right? Does
Mhm.
it mean that I failed? Because if I can't change every doctor from using that terminology, I can decide what I want it to mean about me. And then I just use in my own personal, when I speak about IVF networking, I usually say IVF failed for you, or failed for me, or, something in that sense, that it's not so pointed as you as the individual.
Yeah. Yeah. We can't, it's like we can step in and try and change some of these terms, but it's, sometimes out of our hands. But there's a language that I think can be more compassionate and more the human side versus the clinical side. Where
Yeah,
these are
I
real
agree with
lives
you.
we're talking about, like real
Totally.
lives.
Totally. And I I did talk to a couple doctors when we were at ASRM, and they told me that they don't use the word failed to describe their patients. So
Hmm.
I probably should have probed and asked how they describe us. But I thought that was
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah. Thriving after infertility. That's what you're about. Really thriving, living life fully, keeping that joy alive. moving forward without kids and, being able to get to a place where you can be with friends' kids or your god kids and like share a little bit about kind of the work you're doing, how you're supporting women and, stepping into this space of thriving after unsuccessful treatment.
Yeah. Well, I really have, through my years of being a coach and the many women that I've worked with, have sort of narrowed it down into 3 different pillars. So I can kind of touch on
Yeah.
that today. So I'll highlight them first. So relationships. So that could be relationship with your partner, friends with kids, coworkers who come to work every day and all they're doing is talking about their kids, family who's expectant of you to give your mom a grandchild or whatever the case is. So that's kind of the relationship pillar. Then there's one I call body image, which isn't just about physically how you look. Although, like I shared in my journey, it was being really uncomfortable, not physically fitting into my clothes and knowing that I had given up on myself and didn't care about working out because I was like, who cares anyway? I'm failed as a woman. But also the second part of the body image is really learning how to forgive your body. Because I think a lot of people who don't end up having children think that their body didn't work like it was supposed to. And they hold a big grudge against their body, like their body failed them. So that's sort of the body image kind of lumped together pillar there for you. And then the third one is owning your time, which isn't really like a sexy title. I feel like I would love to find if anyone has ideas of how I could rephrase this after you hear me tell about it, let me know. But for women who are moving forward in a life without children, your future and figuring out how you're going to fill the next 40 or 50 years of your life, you have this, like, I think of it like this blank white canvas. It is very overwhelming and almost suffocating because you're like, what am I going to do without the milestones of motherhood? When you thought you're going to be a mom, you're like, oh, well, by the time Sue's, 18, we'll be downsizing and she'll be going to college. Like your life is sort of predicted, at least for me. I just thought it was going to be in sync with me raising a child. And when you don't have those preset parameters or milestones to plan your life against, it feels very overwhelming. And people look at you and they're like, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. You get to go to yoga on a Saturday and you don't have to worry about this. And you don't feel that way as a woman who's childless. So the owning your time pillar is really helping women figure out what they can do in their lives or what they want to do in their lives that feels connective to them and meaningful, that they're not dreading their final days because they're thinking, oh, I'm going to die old alone in a nursing home. Because that's what most of us do think when we don't have kids. We're like, oh my gosh, like who's going to take care of me? So your brain automatically goes to end of life. And all those years in between just seem like suffocating. So the owning your time is the third pillar. So that's kind of where I work my clients through my program called Thrive After Infertility and help them really figure out like how can we make change in the way that we are existing in those different relationships with the way that we see ourselves, how we're figuring out what we want to do to spend our time. And are we proud of who we wake up being every day? And if we're not, like, what do we need to do to create that pride for ourselves?
So powerful, Lana. I heard you talk about on your podcast recently about those 60-year-old woman.
Yeah.
Who had navigated through unsuccessful treatment, I believe, and kind of held on to this internal pain for years, thinking that like time was going to heal. And it's heartbreaking, right? Like you are all about like helping women step into being a creator of your story, like reclaiming your life, rewriting this narrative, and share a little bit about kind of your reflections on that experience and how that sat with you, because it moved me. And I just feel like, wow. And again, no judgment. It's just like how hard that must be to go through life feeling so it's just not a sense of purpose or unfulfilled in life, thinking that children are going to be that answer.
Yeah. And I think most of us think that children are the only way to feel meaningful and purposeful and as though you're creating a legacy.
Mhm.
And I did too. And I don't think you're wrong for feeling that. And moms who feel that way, like, I have no judgment for them. But when I wasn't offered that opportunity, I started to see that that doesn't have to be the universal only
Mm.
way to create meaning and purpose. But a lot of women don't hear that story, or they don't know how to think anything but that. So they sit in this
Mm.
waiting period of life, just thinking that if another year goes by, like, oh, time heals all wounds. Like, how many times do we hear that? Like,
Yeah.
certainly it- moving out 2 years from leaving treatment, it doesn't feel
Mm.
as like stifling as it probably did the day that you decided that you weren't going to do anything anymore. But when those emotions come up and they're not figured or pointed to, or you haven't figured out a way to navigate through them and acknowledge the grief that still will exist. I mean, I still have moments where I have triggers that, where I'll see a mother and a child have this connective moment. And I'm like, oh, like, that must be so beautiful. Uh, so it's the reality that a lot of women just aren't given the resources, or they think that, oh, well, that would never happen for me. So they don't even try. And then they just coexist in this life that feels mediocre.
Mm.
And that was really like when I talked about in 2020, like looking at myself in the mirror, I felt like my life was at 80%. Like, yeah, I had a job and we had a nice house and, I made good money and great husband, but I just felt like I didn't want to be an 80% person forever.
Mm. Mhm.
And so this woman who I saw her post on a Facebook group that I'm in, I was just like, gosh, I couldn't imagine spending decades of my life thinking like, oh, if I just hang on one more year, maybe next year will feel better.
Mm.
And that's where I think the power of coaching is so important, to help people figure out that they don't have to wait.
Yeah. Was there
So,
a moment in that kind of 2 years after treatment, you were like, you felt this, it was her, this angel of a coach who showed up to you and like, offering you an opportunity to get the support? Like, what was it? Was it a moment you're like, I am getting out of this funk? Was it, it's not a funk, that's not the word, but like how to reclaim again your life?
yeah,
What was,
I love telling this story because when you think of someone like pregnant, you always hear people say, oh, you're glowing, like you have the pregnancy glow.
uh,
And I was working with Corinne Crabtree, who's the weight loss coach that I was working with. And again, it wasn't just all about weight loss. Like, I came to find that she was a life coach. So she was teaching all this other stuff that was attributed to why we eat, to soothe our emotions or avoid emotions. But people would come up to me and they'd be like, I just have to tell you, you are glowing. Like, people would tell me all the time, like unconnected people, family work. And I kept hearing the word glowing. And I thought to myself, my gosh, I guess I don't have to be pregnant to glow. And there was just like this moment that I was like, oh my God, like, I do feel different and I am different. And that was sort of my light bulb moment, was hearing someone reference me in a way that I thought was only reserved for people who had children or
Mm.
were pregnant.
Gosh, that's such a good story.
Yeah.
People feel it. People feel our energy. Like we emit a different kind of vibe. And you obviously went through a transformation.
Yeah. And I guess I didn't recognize it until people started saying it and I'd hear it multiple times. And then I was like, oh, I guess I am, but it's like
Yeah.
typical, right? Other people commonly see the things in us that we don't necessarily see before that.
Mhm.
But I'm glad that people told me that, because
I
it
love
really
that.
was a transformational moment for me.
So cool. I remember like, in just hearing you talk about legacy, I feel, this pain and these life struggles, challenges we're faced, they often can lead us to a new purpose and leaving a legacy through the podcast that you've created, through the book we'll talk about in a little bit that you're coming out with in April, and the Others Day brunch. I want you to share about that because you are impacting so many lives. I would love to be there to like be a part of this in some way. It's so special what we create. I would love for you to share what this Others Day brunch is about.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of your legacy, I believe.
Yeah. Well, I'll start off with that. And then I would love to talk about the greater idea of what legacy is, because I think I have a unique perspective on purpose and legacy. So I want to make sure we leave time
Yeah.
for that. But
Yeah, for sure.
Mother's Day brunch started out in April of 2022. I remember I was at Target and there was a bunch of Mother's Day signs and a lot of the emails were coming out and the restaurants had the Mother's Day brunch specials, all this type of stuff. And I have a mom that is in my life active and, not too maybe 45 minutes away from me. So we see each other very regularly and Mother's Day is always about her, which as it
Mm,
should be.
mm,
But I thought, gosh, I'll never have Mother's Day. Like once my mom's gone, what's Mother's Day going to be for me? And so
mm.
I decided, I was like, well, you know what? I'm just going to start a meetup group and I'm going to, put a brunch together the Saturday before Mother's Day. I live in Chicago. I live in a condo building. So there's like a party room you can rent. And I was like, I'll just rent the room and we'll see who shows up. And so that was in April of 2022. And I think we had maybe 18 women the first
Great
Mother's
turnout.
Day. And it was like really a beautiful experience to have women come together, and some are childless not by choice, some are, childless by choice. The group that I started is just for anyone who doesn't have kids.
Mhm.
So the next year I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do this again. And then I had more people show up, but then I realized, maybe there's people out there that don't have a mom that's living anymore, or maybe I have a friend whose mom has severe dementia who doesn't even remember her anymore.
Mm,
And I said, well, I'm going to expand it to people who maybe don't have a living mom or an active mother figure in their life. And then expanded again the last year. And this year is going to be May 10th, 2025 here in Chicago. I toyed with the idea a couple years. I had people do ambassador events, but there's just something magic. People have
yeah.
flown in from all over Puerto
Mm.
Rico, Nebraska, Kansas, Florida, Texas. Like people will
Wow.
come in, and people
Mm,
on social media who are in the childless space who've
mm,
never met physically, and then to like bring them in this room and really like see the bonds that are created is just really beautiful to witness. But
mm,
it all started from doing something that I was missing. Like I felt like I was missing out. And so I created Others Day. I felt like I didn't hear a story about someone who's childless after infertility. So I started a podcast. Like I think a lot of what we create with our lives and what creates our legacy is not chasing this title of like, oh, this is going to be my purpose. And it's like, you don't have to rubber stamp your purpose, or you don't
yeah.
have to have it written out like what your legacy is on your last day. And I think if you just show up doing the things that you feel fulfilled by,
Mhm.
and you feel as though like you're showing up naturally as you each day, your legacy and your purpose just naturally become created for you.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get so caught up in like, well, is that important enough to call my purpose? Or,
Mm,
and so they shy away from doing things because they're like, well, is anyone going to see that as purposeful as I do, to define my purpose as being someone who's
yeah.
the creator of the Others Day brunch? And it's like, well, no, if you just move forward in your life, doing things that feel really honoring of you and filling a void that maybe you wish you had, then the
Mm.
rest just kind of falls in line.
So beautiful. Yeah, we define purpose, right? No one else gets to define that for us.
Yeah, totally. And I think people make it a lot harder, but I get it. You thought you were going to be a mom. And so what's ever going to
Mhm.
supersede that title that you thought would be the golden ticket?
My mind is thinking about being an occupational therapist. We talk about a lot of purposeful activity and meaning, and like there can be so much purpose in the simplest of activities.
Yeah.
The purpose of, in taking a walk full of mindfulness, the purpose of like getting out of bed every day, showering. There's purpose in cooking and, in the simple things. It doesn't have to be a grandiose thing. Taking care of
Yeah. I
oneself.
love saying hi to people too. Like that's one of my purposes. Like I
Yeah.
think when I see someone, like I always try to like engage, eye contact, smile, hello.
Yeah.
And I think like, what if I'm the only person who's ever done that for that person today? And they were like,
Yeah.
oh my
So
gosh. And
true.
just in that millisecond, they felt recognized. And for me, I just do it because I love to say hi and have that
Yeah.
human interaction.
Well, same. I think when I met you, it's just like you exude this light, and I feel like we're both light workers in this kind of dark space, you
Yeah.
know? And I know you got a chance to talk a little bit with your doctor about what you're doing in that moment. And I think you shared, you're thriving, some of the things you've created. Will you share a little bit about that moment with
Yeah. Well,
meeting?
the last time I had talked to my doctor, it was over the phone because we were in Chicago and he was in Colorado.
Mhm.
And I had already known that my frozen embryo was chromosomally abnormal. So we had gotten through that conversation. And then this was the follow-up conversation from that, presenting us with the idea of adopting or egg donor. And the last words were, I know how bad you and Jack wanted this. Think about these options and let me know. And then, as I said at the onset of our, podcast episode here today, like
Mhm.
I never heard back anymore. So for the last, since 2018, when we had that conversation, it was a long
A
time.
long
Like
time ago. Yeah.
I just always wondered, like, does he ever think about me? Like, do they ever
Mm.
wonder what happened to me? Like, or are they just consumed with the patients that get pregnant and they can put the pictures up, of the
Mm.
mom and the baby and the Christmas cards with the family of, 5 with the swaddled baby, and I really felt like I wanted him to know that I wasn't worth forgetting.
Mm.
And it was really a moment I had thought about for so long. Like when I became a life coach back in 2021, my husband's like, send him a Christmas card. And I was like, okay. And then I never had the chance well, I don't want to say I didn't have the chance. I didn't have the courage really.
Mm.
And so the next year went by. So here we are
Yeah.
finally in 2024. I was able to become face to face with him at the conference,
Yeah.
and I felt sort of stalkerish, I was like, whatever. But you know what? I needed to do it for me. And that's one thing I think coaching teaches you is that what you need for yourself is paramount. And if someone judges you or somebody thinks that it's silly or not important, like that's they're allowed to have that thought about you, but you don't have to have that thought about you. So it was
Mm.
really special to have you with me there and kind of encourage me in that moment.
Mm.
And I don't know if he'll ever think about it again. I did send him a Christmas card this year and reiterated everything that I'd been
Oh.
doing and how we can share my resources with his patients. And I had some pointed requests of him, like, please check in on your patients. They want to
Mm.
hear from you. They want to know if there's something else that they can do to become connected with other childless women. So I feel like I left some marching orders of
Yeah.
requests on behalf not only of me, but of the women that I support and the women in my community
Mm.
who I've maybe only heard of a handful that even were referred to a therapist to work with after their treatment ended without a child.
Oh gosh. And the strength that you just shared, that it didn't come right away. This took years in the making
Yeah.
to get to this point. And I think that's a testament to the power of, like, you kept moving forward and honoring and knowing maybe one day this would come, that this was on your heart. I want to talk to him. Maybe the timing wasn't right initially, but just like, I'm excited and honored that I got to be there for that. And
Thank you.
what other lessons or strengths that come to mind from the journey that you've been on, would you say?
Well, I think a lot of us, whether you're still in the midst of fertility treatments or like me moving forward without children,
Mhm.
it seems like when somebody asks if you have kids or they assume that you have kids or, you'll be at a networking event. For me, it would come up a lot in corporate networking events. It was always the icebreaker question. So how many kids do you have?
Ugh,
So there
yeah.
was this assumption that you were a mom off the bat. And when you had none to speak of, or had gone through pregnancy loss and, maybe navigating something like that, well, you want to say, oh, I have 3 angel babies. But people don't
Mhm.
understand that. So you just sort of stay silent. I realized how much of our ownership of the conversation we lost.
Mm.
And I still see that, in some of the ways that people approach me and I tell them, oh, I wasn't able to have children. Oh, you can always adopt.
Mm.
So
Mm.
it's very, I'm sure comes from a loving place from them when they tell you, oh, you know, hang on, or my aunt's sister's cousin's whatever got
Yeah.
pregnant at age 48, and you're just like, yeah, you know, like, well, that's not going to happen, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like we lose a lot of times our ownership of our story when people just ask us a question that they think is just a simple get to know you question.
Yeah.
So I work a lot in my community about helping women decide how do they want to answer those questions. And I think you could do that even if you're still going through fertility treatments. If somebody asks you, like, what's your canned answer? And we practice it and recite it in front of a mirror, you know, because
Mm-hmm.
when it comes up for you and you say it the first time, it's like, oh, you know, like, I don't know how this is going to sound, or you worry that someone's going to think you're being bitchy if you tell them that you're not really wanting to talk about it right now, or that
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
kind of a hard thing to talk about. So for me, I think it's really important to know what it is that you want to lead with when you're talking and acknowledging the journey that you're on. So I created a free download. It's called the top 27 things people say when you're childless and how to
Mm-hmm.
respond. That gives people this language to maybe try out and work on it a little bit. So that's available
I
on my
love that.
website if anyone wants to see it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, I think with each person too that asks these personal questions, I mean, you can almost like discern for yourself, like how you want to respond. Do you want to like play it off, be funny? Do you want to be truthful? Do you want to be like, oh, that's a personal question? Wow. Like, people are so nosy. Like, I think sometimes like the truth just needs to come out too and like put people in their place a little bit. I mean,
Yeah. And that's, why I created this resource, because I think depending on who
yeah.
your audience is, your question is
Yeah.
going to be answered. The question's going to be answered in a different way. And also, like, how are you feeling that day? Like, sometimes I'll just be like, no, I don't. And period.
Yeah.
I don't
Yep.
have to say
Yeah.
more. Sometimes I'll take it as an opportunity to educate people, be like, oh, you may not realize that not everyone has children. I actually went through fertility treatments, and then I'll get into this long dissertation, and people will be like, oh, I'm so sorry, and I don't do it for a shaming of them, but it recognizes, you know what, like, here's why I'm not a mom. And I don't have to stay silent about it all the time. And I can use it as an opportunity. So the next person that they encounter, maybe they won't ask that same question in the same way to make someone else feel violated.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. We could talk forever. Like this is
I know. I don't even know. Are we like,
that's a I feel like these are great. I mean, handling baby showers, pregnancy announcements, all these life events that we're a part of. You've lived it. It's more challenging to face some of these insensitive comments and the experiences. It's like having these tools in place. That's the power of coaching.
totally?
Um, As far as navigating friendships, I'm sure you have grown such an immense community of women around you who um, are thriving without children. And I just want to hear like what your life's like right now. Like, do you guys get together a lot? Are you like, what's lighting you up right now?
Yeah. Well, I have my meetup group that I try to do events maybe like every other month. Is we'll do like a Halloween happy hour, because when you don't have kids, Halloween, it's like you maybe still want to dress up, but you feel weird as like person
Yeah.
who doesn't have kids like dressed up. So we'll do like a Halloween happy hour, of course, Other's Day, Galentine's. We do a Christmas Secret Santa gift exchange. So I really try to encourage women to have an outlet to do the things that they thought they'd be doing because they had children, and
Mhm.
still find opportunities to celebrate. So I do that through my meetup group. And then my core group of girls is still my girls that have been my friends for 20 some years. One is an IVF mom of identical twins. Another
Mhm.
one is a single mom. The other one's a foster mom. And I'm a dog mom.
Mhm.
And what I love about the evolution of our friendship is there were times during my journey where I didn't get baby gifts when they had their kids. I
Mhm.
didn't go to the first birthday party for one of my friends for the twins. Like, I wasn't there. I couldn't,
Mhm.
it was too emotionally hard for me. And I
Mhm.
love that I showed up for myself doing what I needed at that time in my life, but still that I have a friendship with her that it just never comes up. It's never like, oh my God, Lana never came to the girl's first birthday.
Mm.
And I think I look at it more so of, gosh, I'm really proud that I didn't give up on our friendship because our lives look really different. Because I think a lot of people without kids think that they no longer can have friends with kids anymore. And for some people it might not be a healthy friendship where there's finger pointing and smack talking because you didn't show up. And maybe it's time to move forward from those type of friendships. But I've come to find that my friends realized I was going through a hard time too. And my friend, she's a foster mom, and she's got a lot of times in her lives where she'll call and be like, hey, I just need you to listen. And I don't not want to listen to her because I don't have kids. Like, a friend's a friend.
Yeah.
So I love that we've created this type of friendship where I see myself as so strong and so evolved that I'm able to hear about mothership moments and hardships and the good times too, and not feel like I'm less than or missing out because I don't have equal events to share about.
Yeah.
So that's what I love about the friendships that we've cultivated. I love that we're all like my single mom friend, like there's like everything in the gamut that
you got each one.
have. Yeah. And the four of us have been through
Each
so
represented.
much.
Oh my gosh. And your new book coming out in April.
Yes.
And so next, I'm so happy for you. Congratulations.
Thank you. I've been wanting to write a book for a while, and I decided now is the time. So I'm going to launch it in early April, and we have National Infertility Awareness Week coming up towards the end of April. So I thought that would be a meaningful time to have the book in hand. Also with Other's Day and then Mother's Day coming up, it could be a really good resource. So it's not really about me. I mean, there's parts of my story that are woven in, but it's more a book that reads with active tools that you can take away, things in every chapter that you could do some journaling, that you could start doing some work to look at the way that you're navigating life and deciding, is this something that feels good to you? Is there a new perspective on how you want to move forward? So the book is called So Now What? Just like my podcast. So Now What? So yeah, it's going to be good. I'm finalizing the cover design.
Yeah.
And there's just so much. You're an author. So much
Yeah.
that I never thought about. And I'm like looking for opportunities to get into bookstores. And I'm like, wait, I got to do all this.
It's a lot of work. I can't believe my book will be 5 years in May. It's crazy. Birthday.
So
But
I could probably learn a lot from you. You're going to have to do a little tutorial.
Happy to support you. But gosh, and I'm sure you're implementing all these tools too that you write about in what you've been recovering from since fracturing your patella on your knee. It's like, seriously, these are tools that like we implement through, and that's my book too. It's like, it won't just help you through challenges through fertility and post and it's beyond. It's like in our day-to-day living, you're living that right now. What's helping you like kind of stay in that energy of moving forward and keeping that hope alive?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because just yesterday I still work with a life coach for myself, and we met yesterday, and I told her, I was like, since I fell, randomly fell and fractured my patella and then had surgery and have been in immobilized, like my whole life was turned upside down. I was like, I never once questioned, like, why did this happen to me? And it was such a realization of where I've come from infertility, because, for so long I was like, did I do something wrong? Like, who did I cross in my life that I'm getting a payback for not being able to have a kid? And I think it's just the realization that like things happen to us and we don't always have to question the why, but you can move forward and decide, who do I want to be, knowing that this is my information that I'm or living or my new normal or however you want to look at it. But with this setback and this thing that I didn't anticipate, how do I want to show up and how can I be most loving and compassionate to myself? And many of us, especially as women, we're not taught to be compassionate to ourselves. We're taught to put the face on and just muster through it and don't let anyone know you're suffering. And you really like do more harm than saying, you know what, like this really stinks right now. And it happened not because I'm a bad person, not because, this, and this, but
Yeah.
how do I want to show up being with this new information that I'm moving forward with?
Yeah. How can this be happening for me, not to me? If it's like helping you slow down or whatever it may be.
Yeah. And I think, there's a lot that I took away with my relationship, how my husband has shown up.
Mm,
Friends have come out of the woodwork. I talked early on about how a lot of women without kids worry about dying old and alone because they don't have a kid to take care of them. And I just was proven like people are there for you, whether you're their mother or not, like people dropping off food, taking me to therapy, grocery
mm,
shopping, and it's really given me an opportunity to see that people love you no matter what's going on in your life. So I
yeah.
I feel like
Oh,
I needed this.
oh. Well, I love you. So grateful for this conversation and just, the work you're doing. And how can people find you if they want to connect with you?
I'm most active on Instagram, Lana
Hmm.
Manikowski. I don't know. A lot of people say they're getting off social media or they're getting off social media, but I'm there. And
Me too.
then my website is lanamanikowski.com.
Hmm.
And then I just recently started a Substack. I don't know if you know
Oh
Substack,
yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
but yeah, so I like to write. I like to kind of share my story through writing. So I'm giving that a shot. So I have a Substack
Beautiful.
too.
I love that. Do you have any like a mantra that you live by or a favorite like quote or like what's kind of the theme? If you have a word, sometimes people have a word or like for the year. Do you have anything that like comes to mind or what you want to leave people with?
I don't know. Well, I don't really have like something that's posted like one thing, but
Mm,
I really just think that you're the owner of your story. And I think it's really important that, what I'd love to leave is that the story that you've always heard isn't the story that you have to move forward living and
mm.
being.
So good, Lana. You're helping a lot of people.
Thank you. You are too.
Always share
I
this.
love the work you do and
Thank
your
you.
spirit and your energy. I can go on for hours. You
Aw.
just such a calming way about you and your students and listeners and clients are just really lucky to have you.
No, I appreciate you. I can't wait to share this and you're helping a lot of people. So get
Thank
this
you.
out soon. Love you.
Love you
Bye.
too. Bye.